talked a lot, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, you know, like Miss Jackson says, when I was a little kid, I liked to read, but I never paid any attention to who the author was. Like, I would read a book and I would just read the story. And I hardly would even notice that on the front cover there was an author's name. That wasn't really what mattered to me. I think it was a long time before I even realized that there was such a job as being a writer. I sort of thought of books as like, you know, these like magical things that just sort of like, you know, like how mushrooms pop up on the front lawn sometimes, and they're like all kinds of wild colors and shapes, and they just appear. I kind of thought of books like that for a long time. I didn't even think of them as something that people made. So it was a long time before I decided to become a writer, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how I make my books. And thank you for inviting me. And yes, I live in Cleveland Heights. I have a really good friend who lives in Lakewood on Woodward Avenue, so I come over to Lakewood all the time, so we're neighbors. Okay, let's see, where should we start? Well, the reason that I became a writer is, duh, I love stories. I have always loved stories as long as I can remember. Before I could read, I was a story lover. I like to carry around books and say to my mom or my babysitter, could you read to me? Could you please read me this book? And sometimes they had time to sit down and share the story with me, and sometimes they were too busy. You know how grown-ups are. But if they didn't sit down with me, well, that was okay, because I would just open up the book and look at the pictures and make up my own story, and I would pretend that I could read. So I liked stories in books from the time I was really little, but I also liked other kinds of stories. I liked stories that were true, real family stories that people would pass down to me. Like, there was one of my favorite stories was one that my mom would tell me about how she was pregnant and I was supposed to be born in just about 2 weeks, and they still couldn't decide what to name me. They didn't know the perfect name. I was their first child and I wanted to get the perfect name. So there is this family story about how they decided to name me Patricia. That's my full name. So I would ask my mom to tell me that story. And I bet in your family, your grandmas or your cousins or your aunts and uncles have stories like that too that they could share. I also like stories that I would make up. Even though I couldn't write yet, I could make up stories. And anytime that you pretend, or you make believe, or you use your imagination, you're kind of writing a story. So I would be a main character in my stories. I would be a princess, or I would be an astronaut, or I used to like to pretend that I was a dog. That's another story. But so I would pretend and I would use my imagination and I would be a character and I would make stuff happen. I would be writing a story in my head. I also like to do things like say, you know when you have to wait sometimes, like and you're really bored and you have to just sit there, or at night and you can't fall asleep, I would make a game called What If? And I'd think, well, what if? What if I had a superpower? What one would it be? Or what if my cat could talk? What would she tell me? Or what if I wasn't born in North America? What if I was born in South America? Or Asia? Or Africa? What if I was born in the past? What if I was born in the future? And I would try to imagine a story that would go with those scenarios. So I was always into stories as long as I can remember. This is what I looked like when I was a little kid. My mom used to cut my bangs and I would always wiggle around so my bangs were always crooked. So when I got to be in first grade, you can tell it's coming, right? That's when this amazing, mind-blowing, life-changing thing happened. And my teacher taught me how to read. First read, yeah. And the first book that I could ever read all by myself was called Fun with Dick and Jane. Maybe some of you have seen that book. It's still around, yeah. It's not, to tell you the truth, the most exciting book in the world. Like, not much happens. But I learned to read from that book, and so I loved it because now I could go on and I could read much more exciting books. Books where I was dying to know what was going to happen next, and books where I wondered, why did that happen? And pretty soon after I learned to read this book, I became a kind of a reading monster. And I was reading all the time. I mean, I was a normal kid. I liked to do all kinds of things, like watch TV, play outside, and ride my bike, and go to the beach. But I also really, really loved to read. And my mom would often be looking around the house, and she'd be like, "Where's Trisha? She didn't do her homework yet. Where's Trisha? Her room is a disaster area. She's supposed to be cleaning it up. Where is she?" There she is. She's on the couch in the living room, reading a book again. But in my mind, you know what? I wasn't on that couch. I wasn't even in my house. I was wherever that book took me. I was walking in the shoes of the characters in that book and having their experiences. So if I was reading a book about a girl who owned her own horse, which is something I wished for myself, I would feel like I owned that horse too. I was on the back of a beautiful golden horse with a silver mane and tail that were streaming out because we were galloping across the meadow together. I feel like I was right there. Or if I was reading an adventure story and there were some explorers, some archaeologists, and they were going into an ancient tomb that no one had been in thousands of years, and they creaked the door open, and they shone their flashlight around into the darkness, and they found a mummy, and the mummy started to sit up. My heart would be pounding, I would be sweating, I'd be like, whoa! I feel like I was right there in that ancient tomb too, like it was happening to me. So, I liked to read. Long before I knew that I was going to be a writer, I knew that I was a reader and a story lover. And you know how they say, how many lives do they say that cats have? 9 lives. Well, if you're a reader, you know how many lives you have? 99 lives. 999 lives. Somebody said unlimited. That's exactly right. Because anytime that you pick up a book, if you use your imagination, if you open up your heart, you can have the lives of the characters in that book. You can imagine that you're them. So, one reason that I asked that question is because I think it's true, and the other one is because it gives me the excuse to show you my cat. And that's my little cat, Billy. And he doesn't like to have his picture taken, so I only can take his picture from the back when he doesn't notice that I'm taking it. And Billy is a kind of a rascal. He used to always love to run outside. He's supposed to be indoors, but he would sneak outside any chance he could. And he would race around and chase the squirrels and the chipmunks and get into fights with the other cats in the neighborhood. He was a really wild guy when he was younger. Now Billy's getting a little bit older and he's slowing down a little bit. And he stays inside more and he looks out the window. And that's what I think. What if Billy could tell me what he's thinking when he's looking out that window? Is he remembering his old adventures when he was a little cat? Is he daydreaming about something? That could be a good story, right? Yeah. Well, so I grew up and I had 2 things in my life that I loved the best. Still stories was one thing, and the other thing was kids. I always had jobs working with kids. In Head Start, in libraries, in schools. I always wanted to be around kids because you guys, you're like the best people on the planet. Like, kids really like to laugh, yes. Kids really care deeply about what's right and what's wrong in this world. Kids ask a lot of questions. You're curious. Sometimes grown-ups think they know everything, right? But kids never think that. Kids always know there's more that they can find out. So I've always been drawn to kids like, you're my people. So as I got older, and by this time I was really old, I was almost 30 years old, I realized I had these 2 things in my life that were most important to me: stories and kids. And I started thinking about, how can I bring those 2 things together in my life? that was my bright idea. Doing the things that you love the best in life, if you can get to do that, you're really, really lucky. So I started trying to write stories, not just read stories, write stories, and I made them for the kids that I worked for, and the kids that I was with every day, and I thought about what kids thought was funny, and what they thought was scary, and what they thought was sad, and what made them angry, and I would try to put all that stuff in my stories. So I'd work in the day, and I'd come home and I'd write. And then, when I thought I had a story that was good enough, I tried to get it published, and you guys know what publishing means, right? So I would send the story to a publisher, and then I would have to wait. I would send it off, and the days would go by, and I'd think, well, maybe the editor read my story by now, maybe they're liking it, maybe I'm going to get a letter that's going to say, we're accepting your story, we're turning it into a real book. But what I got in the beginning of my career, and what I still sometimes get, even though I've been writing for a really long time, was rejections. My stories got turned down. The publisher said that they weren't good enough for them to make them into a book. So that was pretty disappointing. And has anybody here ever had that experience of you tried really hard at something and you thought you did a good job, and then somebody tells you it's not good enough? Yeah. I think it's a pretty common experience, but it does not feel good, does it? No. So I had rejections, and like I said, I still sometimes have rejections, but an interesting thing happened, and that is that the more I wrote, the more I realized, well, even if nobody else wants my stories, I'm still going to keep writing them, because I really like writing. I really like creating these whole worlds and being the boss of the world and deciding what happens in my stories and trying to make them as true to life as I can and try to put my feelings on the paper. So I kept writing even though I was getting rejected. And I'm sure you've had grown-ups give you this advice when you don't succeed the first time or the second time. They say, well, you know, what you really need to do is you have to keep practicing. Writing was like that too. I had all these great ideas, but I didn't have all the skill. So I had to keep practicing. And I didn't give up. And one day, I went to the mailbox and I found the letter. Usually my story would come back in an envelope, a big fat envelope. They would just send the whole story back. But this day, there was a skinny envelope in my mailbox. And I thought, whoa, well, this is different. And I was nervous, and I opened it up, and inside was a letter that said, Dear Mrs. Springstubb, thank you for sharing that story. We love it. We will publish it, and we will pay you for it. I can still remember how happy I was that day, because I still get that happy. Even though I've published like 20 books by now, every time I find out I'm going to get a new one, I get just that happy all over again. To know that if I wrote a story, it's not just going to be my story anymore. It's going to go out in the world. It's going to be your story, too. So that's how I became a writer. And I'll show you a little bit about how I do it. There's my really messy desk in my house in Cleveland Heights. And those are some of my idea journals. I get lots of ideas for stories. I don't turn all of them into stories, but I write down ideas all the time. Things that catch my interest, questions that I have. Sometimes kids tell me a dream or something that happened to them. I write that down. I keep all my ideas ready, and when I get one that I think, whoa, this one is more than just a little idea. This one I can make into a whole book. I start making notes, and I start to get it together. And I'll show you some of the things that have turned into stories for me. And usually, they're things, like I said, from my real life. Like, oh, there's my desk again. There's my coffee cup. And there's my window that I look out when I get stuck. You guys ever get stuck when you write? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You think, I don't know what should happen next. Or, I thought I started writing one story, now it seems like it's turning into another story. What's happening here? I'm confused. That happens to me all the time. That's the window that I look out when I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with my story and how to fix it. So here's a place that I love. It's called Kelly's Island. You know it? You like it too? I go there every summer too. Maybe I saw you there. Kelly's Island, you get on a ferry and you ride there and you get there and you can go swimming, you can hunt for fossils, you can ride your bike, you can eat fudge. They have a really good fudge shop there. So that's a favorite place of mine, and every time when I go there, when it's time to go home and my vacation's over, I feel disappointed and I feel like, I wish I could stay here. I wish I could live on Kelly's Island all the time and not have to go back to my boring old house in Cleveland. But I can't. I have a lot of things I have to do. I have to go home. But in my imagination, in my writing life, I don't have to go home. In my imagination, my writing head, I can live on an island. I can make up a story all about it and pretend that I'm a kid who lives there. And I can call it Moonpenny Island. And I can make it a lot like Kelly's Island. I can make up a whole story to go with it. So that's how this book came. Oh, isn't it so beautiful? Pretty much all of my books have animals in them because I just love animals. You know I love cats, but I love all kinds of animals. So I wrote a book called What Happened on Fox Street. And there is a fox on Fox Street, but nobody's ever seen it. And so Mo, who's the main character, she's kind of on a quest to be the one to find that mystical, magical, mysterious fox. Besides wanting to write about a beautiful animal, I wrote that book because of something that really happened, and you know where it happened? Lakewood, Ohio. It was more than 10 years ago, there was a big controversy that happened on the west end of Lakewood, where all the houses are dead ends, the streets are dead ends, and at the end of the street is a metro park, a big ravine, and then a beautiful metro park. And the people that lived in those houses, they were just fine houses, but they're kind of small, not anything fancy. And they were happy there. And along came a developer, somebody with a lot of money and some big ideas. And the developer said, you know what? If we knock these little houses down and replace them with some big fancy condos and restaurants and fancy stores, Lakewood would get a lot more tax money. The mayor of Lakewood said, I like that idea. Let's try and do it. So they tried to take the houses away from these people. They tried to take them away by something called eminent domain, which means you don't even have any choice about it. You just have to get out of your house whether you like it or not. Well, a lot of people in Lakewood thought that this was a good idea, but some people didn't think it was such a good idea. Can you guess who that would be? Exactly. So I read about this in the Plain Dealer, and I thought, this is a really good story. This is a really good conflict at the heart of this story. I think I want to turn this into a book. And then I had another thought that made me really want to write about it, and that was that it connected with a memory from my childhood. When I lived in a very small house, we had 5 kids, we had a little house, and we had a little backyard, but the best thing was, beyond our backyard, there was a big field. It was wide open, it was all kinds of tall grass and trees, and all the kids in the neighborhood, we would run wild back there. We would have all kinds of games, we would have secret hideouts, we would play war, we would play pioneers. The grown-ups never came out there. It was like kid Magic Kingdom. And we played out there all the time. And then one day in the summer, my brother came running into the house and he said, there's a bulldozer in the middle of the field. What? It turned out we didn't even know somebody owned the field, and he decided to sell it to a developer. And the developer came in with machines and knocked everything down, flattened everything out, and built big houses and took away our field. I know. We were so angry and so sad and so helpless because a lot of times when you're a kid, there's nothing you can do about it, right? You don't have the power to change things. So all of that came connected for me, the real thing that was happening in Lakewood in my own memory, and I decided I really wanted to write a story about it. And I wrote about a girl who does fight back and try to save her house and save her street. So that's Fox Street. This is a cemetery that's near my house, and I like to go for walks there, and they have these big, a lot of sculptures there. It's really old. It was made in like the early 1800s. And there are these big monuments there to people that are buried there. And when I walk in there, I think, wow, there's a lot of stories in this cemetery. The stories of all the people that lived here. Their lives, if they could tell their stories. And so I wrote a book where some of the monuments in a cemetery do get to tell their stories. And the cemetery is Lakeview Cemetery, if any of you have ever heard of that. It's a really famous old cemetery in Cleveland. Some famous people are buried there. So this is the book that came out of that. It's called Every Single Second. And some of you maybe know the Cody Books. And there, I see them right there. Yeah. The Cody Books are, I wrote them because I wanted to write about a cat. There's an important cat character. And because I wanted to write about my neighborhood, which is exactly like Cody's neighborhood. Lots and lots of different people all live kind of close together. And also because I wanted to write about a character who was different from me. You know, it's really fun when you write. You don't have to write about yourself. You can pretend to be anybody you want to be, right? So Cody's really different from me. Cody's really brave, and Cody's really like not a scaredy cat like me. And Cody's not shy. Cody's like always, come on, kids, let's do this, let's do that. She's a leader. And I'm not really like that, but I wanted to pretend I was. So I wrote the Cody Books so I could step into the shoes of a character who was pretty different from me. And so that's how I get my ideas. Here's what my work looks like in progress. That's Phoebe and Bigger. That's a chapter book, a picture book, and I'll show you a little more of that in a couple of minutes. But right now I need a couple of helpers. How about you? How about you? 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 Line up front. Stand right here. I brought my mystery box, and these guys are going to help us try to figure out what's inside it. So what do you think? How does that feel?
A little heavy.
A little heavy. You have a guess what might be in there?
Yeah, a really heavy book.
A really heavy book. Okay. What do you think about it? A lot of books. So, you have a guess? A bunch of books. Like about how many?
Like 20.
Like 20 books. 20 big books, right? You're stronger than me if you don't think it's really heavy. What? About how many books do you have?
About
25 books. Okay. So either it's a lot of books, or it's a lot of rocks, or it's All right, let's see what's inside. Look at all that paper. Do you know what that paper is? I think that's like all of, what do you think it is?
Paper from your book.
It's from one book. Those are all the drafts and the sloppy copies and the rewrites and the notes and the research and the letters from my editor. You guys know what an editor is, kind of like a teacher. She would read the book and say, it's still not good enough to publish. You better work on it some more. I would write it again and again. It turned out that this book, that's this big, that's how much paper, how many notes and papers and rewrites it took me to make this book. Yeah, I know I'm crazy, you're right. But that's what it took, because I couldn't get the story good enough to be published. I couldn't get a story that was good enough to share with you until I took all this time. And you know how much time this took? This was my hardest book. Who wants to guess how long it took to write it? Yeah. 5 days? A month? At least a year? Somebody say 3 years? Ding, 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 ding. That's how long it took me, yeah. 3 years to finish this book. Round of applause. Like writing's really hard, but just to get you, to encourage you really, because sometimes when you're writing, do any of you ever get a little frustrated?
Yes.
Or a little, yeah, you want it to be really good, but it isn't, and your teacher says, maybe just a little bit more stronger verbs here, and where's the beginning of the story, where's the middle? When you have to write something over again, sometimes it doesn't feel that great. But I want you to remember the next time that happens that somebody who's been writing since before you were born, somebody who's a professional writer, it takes me many, many tries before I get a book that's really as good as I can make it. So that's to help you not be too discouraged next time that happens to you. Did you have a question? Yeah, okay. What year was I born? Let's get back to that, but at the end, okay? So stick with the writing part now. So this is a page from Phoebe and Bigger, which is only about 600 words long, but I probably changed about 500 of the words. This is another one of my books. I think this is Moonpenny Island, which I also struggled to get right. One thing, I'll give you one little tip. Sometimes when I'm writing and I'm having trouble with my book, there's two different things that I ask myself. One thing is, what does my main character want? And what does she really want more than anything in the world? And what's standing in her way? That's the problem at the center of the book. And if I know that, that helps me write it. And another tip is to think of your book as kind of like a firework, or your story that you don't have to write on a book. You know how when you go to see the fireworks at 4th of July, you're sitting there on the grass and it's all peaceful and calm. That's kind of like the beginning of the story, where things are kind of normal. Then you see that little seed of the fireworks start going up, right? And it's still just tiny and it didn't explode, but you start to catch your breath like, oh, here it comes, something's gonna happen. That's like how your story gets exciting. Some problems start coming, and then the explosion, where everything comes all together and the problem gets so big and it has to find a resolution. So the story slowly goes up, kaboom, and then the beautiful fireworks, the little colors that come down, 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 down until they settle and things are quiet again. That's the conclusion and the end of your story, when things come together and have we hope, a happy ending. So if you can think of your story sometimes as that too, rising and falling, that can help you get it into shape too. So I write and I read and I rewrite and I rewrite, and finally, when the story's done, I get it published, but before that there's one more step, and that is illustration. I'm not good at drawing. I wish I was, and if any of you can draw, keep it up, get better and better, because it's so wonderful to be able to draw. And you can tell stories that way too. But I can't, so I always have an illustrator help me. And this is a page from one of the Cody books, Cody and the Rules of Life. And in this picture, this is a sketch, a sloppy copy or a draft that the illustrator did. Because the illustrator messes around for a while before he or she gets it perfect too. So here's a scene where Wyatt, that's Cody's big brother, he has just saved up all his money and he bought a mountain bike and he's so excited. And he comes to show it off to Cody, his sister, Mr. Mean, Spencer, and who's Cody's friend, and little Mew Mew the cat, there he is. So Eliza sent me this sketch and she said, what do you think? And I said, I think it's great. You got so much into one picture, including that Cody looks a little bit nervous because she did something that's going to make her big brother really mad when he finds out. She's scared that he's going to find out. So you got all of that into that picture. But one thing, it's supposed to be December. Everybody else has their winter clothes on, and poor Wyatt, he's just got a t-shirt on. And she said, oh my goodness, I got so caught up with all the other parts of the drawing, I forgot about that. So this was her sloppy copy, but if you see it in the real book, Wyatt has a jacket on, thank goodness. So. And here's an example from my picture book, Phoebe and Bigger, which is based on something that really happened to my daughter when she took her favorite toy to the playground, and she was only about 3 years old, and a big kid, maybe 5, came along and was like, oh, I want to play with that toy. And you could guess what happens. Yeah, so the left side is the sketch that Jeff Newman, the illustrator, did, and the right side is how it looks in the book when he put in the color, and you can see that he made some changes. Especially if you look at the slide, do you see a change? Yeah? What do you see? there's another person, right? An added character. And he put that character in there for a reason, because she turns out to be the kind of bully girl that takes away Phoebe's toy. And that's how it looks in the book. And it's kind of scary, but it's kind of funny. And so that's the final art. But Jeff Newman, who's the illustrator, he's kind of a wild and crazy guy. And the first time he drew that picture, he made it really, really, really scary. And I said, Jeff, this is a book for preschoolers. They might be reading it at bedtime. We can't have that scary picture in there. And he said, oh, Patricia, you're such a whip. You're a wuss, you're a whip, yeah. But okay, if you really think it should be changed, I'll change it. So he did. So I'm sure you don't want to see the scary picture. Recycling, but I took a photograph of it first just to save it because it was so terrifying. Yeah. So those are some of the stages that you go through from the first idea for a story to when it's finally a finished book. And the very last stage is one that I don't have anything to do with. When you're a writer, you get a lot of help making a book. You do part of it, but you're on a team that includes the editor and the illustrator and the publisher. And the publisher is the one that sends your book to a factory, a big manufacturing plant, where they can actually make the physical book. Because if you write a story here or at home, you just make one copy. But when you make a book that's going to be distributed to Amazon and around the country and sometimes around the world, they have to make thousands of copies. So that happens in a big manufacturing plant, which I've never actually gone to one of these. I just know about them and heard about them. And that's where the books are printed out and put into the binders and put into the boxes and sent out into the world to share. And once that's all done, I have the fountain of happiness. Because I have another book that can be not just mine, but yours too. So thank you for listening to all of that, and now I'm going to open it up for questions, and you have been very patient. Oh, usually the pictures, they allow an illustrator 1 year to make the pictures. Yeah, I have a picture book that's going to come out next year, and my part of writing it is all done, but a whole year is going to go by until the book is actually published because the illustrator's working on the art. So yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, patience is a good thing to have if you're a writer. How about, let's go way back here.
What kind of book is
The bigger one? Yeah, can you give me what kind? Okay, so it's the book is called Phoebe and Bigger. It's a picture book. That means that the pictures are at least as important, if not more important, than the text, what I wrote. And the illustrator is a guy named Jeff Newman. He lives in Minneapolis, and like I said, he's a wild and crazy guy. And he was very fun to work with. Yeah, even though he made me scared.
What is the longest book you ever made?
The longest book I ever made was probably Every Single Second. It's about 350 pages. Yeah. So I never wrote anything as long as like Harry Potter, but I have written sort of longish books.
What are your tips for writing?
Oh, my tips for writing. Good question. Do you want to be a writer? Yeah? My first tip would be to read. Just read a lot, because you learn so much about how stories are made by just reading them. And then the second one would be to write. And just write, and don't worry if it's good or bad. Just keep writing what's important to you, what's in your heart. And the more you write, really the better you will get. Yeah. So read, and then just do it. And also share your work, you know. If you can share your work with a teacher or a friend, and they'll give you some of their feedback, that's really helpful too, to know what is good and what maybe you could fix up a little bit. Yes? So, do you have any brothers and sisters? Yeah. And if somebody said to your parents, which is your favorite child? What do you think they would say? They would say, I can't pick. That's kind of how writers are about their books. Because our books are a little bit like our children, you know, like we